thank you for coming out to our last astronomy night of 2012. It's our last regularly scheduled astronomy night. In 2013, we're still going to be doing a special astronomy events, just won't be every month. So I'm really glad that you guys are all here. My name is Carolyn. I'm a facilitator here at Telus Spark. And I would like to welcome you, and also welcome Tahir Merali, a Calgary space expert who's here for our last astronomy night of the year. Let's give him a round of applause and a warm welcome to Telus Spark.
Hello, everybody can hear me all right? Yes. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's a lovely evening. Hope you were able to see Jupiter. And thanks again to the Telus Spark Science Center for having me speak to you tonight. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little about what it's like to fly into space. You may know that Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield will be flying to the space station in just under 2 weeks on December 19th. He's launching from Kazakhstan, and he will be joining 5 other astronauts that will be on board the space station for 6 months. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about him and his mission. I'll talk about some of the training involved with becoming an astronaut and training for these types of missions. And then I'll show you a little bit about what it's like to live in space and how things work that way. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You know, we've got a Q&A section at the end. And hopefully I can answer what your burning heart desires. So let's get things started.
T-minus 10, 9.
There you go.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All 3 engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff. The final liftoff of Atlantis.
So that's an interesting segue into where are we going? We're going to the International Space Station. That was actually a photo from the last space shuttle launch that happened last summer. And that was one of the memorable things that inspired me to chase my space pursuits. And a lot of people have different inspirational cues. And one of the places that best helps that is places like the Science Center. I actually came to the old facility back in 1995 to an event like this, the Astronomy Night, and was able to view some planets and some stars with the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Just as a young kid, took weekly classes and was able to learn how to use a telescope, and that kind of helped drive my spirit to chase my dreams. So there's an interesting connection that way. So Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield, he will be on flying what is called Expedition 34 and 35. So you might be wondering, well, those are random numbers. Well, every trip to the space station has a number, and he'll be on 34, and he'll actually, in fact, be commanding Expedition 35, which means he will be the person in charge, like the captain of a ship, and we'll be the first Canadian in history to ever do something like that. And Chris Hadfield has flown into space twice, and every time an astronaut goes into orbit, they have the opportunity to create a patch, and this is Canadian Hadfield's patch, and it's very personal. So can someone tell me what that shape is? Does anybody kind of, what does it look like? There you go, guitar pick. That's correct. Chris Hadfield is an avid musician. He plays in multiple bands, including multiple bands comprised of different astronauts. And he is very passionate about music, and he wanted to carry a little bit of that personal passion with him. So he developed a very unusual design for a patch in the form of a guitar pick. Now, in case anybody out there has mobile devices, feel free to use them. I'm a big fan of Twitter, so if you want to kind of follow along and be trending, I've got a hashtag called #MapleLeafSpace.
Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
So the theme of the night is inspiration, and Chris Hadfield's inspiration, and a lot of folks of his generation, found the moon landings to be one of the most incredible moments of all time. And I guess I'd have to agree with them. But my personal opinion, in terms of my generation, I believe the International Space Station is one of the most incredible feats of human ingenuity. And as we know, it's one challenge to go to the moon, and that sparked a lot of people's interest in pursuing dreams that they never once thought they could. So that kind of got Chris Hadfield on a track of saying, well, what can I do? How can I chase what I like? And so he joined a program called the Royal Canadian Air Cadets when he was 12, and ended up getting his private pilot's license by the time he was 17. He then went on to the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario, did an engineering degree, and then went on to become a fighter pilot, and was actually a test pilot for various military and civilian aircraft, and has thousands of hours in various different, flying in very different aircraft. So that was the route he took. And he was able to and eventually join the ranks of Canada's distinguished space history. Just briefly, in case you're not so familiar with what Canada has done in space, Canada was the third nation to put a satellite into orbit. So after the United States and the Soviet Union, we were able to put a satellite into orbit. Very simple, kind of alien looking. This was actually a science satellite to see what the ionosphere was pretty much composed of. So that was called Alouette 1. Then, anybody know what this is? All right, good stuff. So Canadarm, it's one of the most iconic images of Canada's space contributions, and was actually duplicated. We have two types of arms, one on the space station and one that was on the space shuttle. Does anybody know what this is? That's right, it's a satellite. That's good. The name of this one is RadarSat 2, and there's different types of satellites. And just like you use Google Maps at home to kind of visualize image from space, this takes pictures with the radar, and that helps to see things such as the Gulf of Mexico oil spill a couple years ago. And that you can only see with the radar images. That's pretty impressive. But we also have astronauts, and Chris Hadfield's not the only one. We had our first set of astronauts selected in the early 1980s. Marc Garneau was our first astronaut, Canadian astronaut in space, and Roberta Bondar there in the bottom right was our first Canadian woman. Then they had another recruitment call in 1992, and that's when Chris Hadfield had the opportunity to join the Corps. And then just recently, in 2009, we had two more new astronauts join our Corps. Jeremy Hansen, who's a fighter pilot on the left, and David St. Jacques, who's a medical doctor. And here they are. So this is Chris Hadfield sitting in what is called the Soyuz capsule. And this is the capsule that astronauts fly back and forth to the space station in. Now keep this image in mind, because you can tell it looks a little cramped, right? That's pretty much it. It can only take 3 people, and that's all the space you get. So it's a little tight, but wait and see, it'll get bigger. So who here wants to be an astronaut? Anyone? Oh, I see a few hands. That's good. That's good. Do you guys think, what do you think is some of the most important things to be an astronaut?
Interior design.
There you go. You gotta know how to live and what to make it look like. Gotta look nice, right? Someone's gotta like it.
You have to be brave.
Sorry? You gotta be brave, exactly, courageous. There's a few different things that people keep in mind. Typically, when there's an astronaut recruitment and people want to select astronauts, there's a bunch of different things they think of. Something like communication. Me speaking to you here today is actually a very important skill. You talk to your coworkers every day, you talk to your teacher when you go to school. So if you have the ability to talk to your coworkers or talk to people that you love at home or that you work with, that's incredibly important, especially in life or dangerous situations. As well as passion. You have to really love what you do. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about space, so I do whatever I can to make sure that I'm able to share that with people. So whatever it is you like, whether it be interior design, or whether you like flying an aircraft, or whether you like building things, if you do it and you love it, do it well. And health. You got to be in really good physical condition. You got to be able to exercise quite often, because when you fly into space, since we only stay up there for about 6 months at a time, you can lose almost 30% of your bone mass when you come back down to Earth. And in order to counteract that, you have to build up a lot more muscle mass to support your bones. So working out every day is healthy, but even just doing some daily exercise is fine. Astronauts, when they're on the space station, they actually work out about 1.5 to 2 hours every day just to retain that muscle mass. So there's different ways that you can gain experience. One way for me personally, I currently contribute to experiments on the International Space Station. So this is myself. I'm actually weightless. I'm flying in what's called a parabolic flight. And basically, if you can't go to space, or you have to be able to test certain equipment or experiments, you can go in a really big plane. And that basically does a big roller coaster. So it kind of goes like this. Up and down, up and down. And when it goes on the top of the curve, you end up experiencing weightlessness. So you're actually falling at the same rate as the plane is. And that's basically how we are able to replicate what astronauts really feel and how they live up in orbit. Except in this case, I only did it about 22 seconds at every time, so it wasn't consistent. But that's one way we test experiments before we fly them on the space station. There are other ways that you can train to be an astronaut. So before you get selected, there's certain skills that they try and test for. For example, survival skills, say if you're to be recovered from the ocean. You can sit down and do a virtual reality test where they put some goggles on you and spin you in a chair to see how you react to being disoriented in certain situations. Also survival tactics. Well, what happens if you're out stuck in the bare bush with your two friends and you got to fend for yourself? Well, you got to learn how to cook. There's different ways we can get to the space station. Generally, it's by rockets. Here's some examples of a few. The space shuttle, of course, is no longer operational, but that's okay. There's some other ones coming up. And rockets are like big dump trucks. They carry things. And when if you've got a pickup truck at home, you've got, how much load can you carry, right? So these rockets take what we call payloads. And payloads can be anything like satellites. They can be different spacecraft. They can be humans. So the Soyuz capsule, remember I showed you that photo of Chris Hadfield with his two buddies? So that's what the inside of the first craft on the far right looks like. And there's some various other ones that different countries and independent companies have developed as well. So the International Space Station, it was started being built in 1998 by the Russians with the Zarya module, and then was joined by the Americans with the Destiny module. And this is a very good animation actually from the USA Today, and it really shows the complexity of building something like this. Now, imagine you're building a house, right? You're building a house here, you put the frame up, or lay the foundation, you put the frame, put some walls in, light bulbs, your furniture. That all happens in different steps. Just like that on the space station, the same kind of thing. You have to be able to have a solid foundation, which are trusses. You have to be able to have places to live or put the walls on. So that's different modules that they attach. Well, you need to have some electricity. So they attach these things called solar panels. But as you can see, things don't necessarily stay the same way that they started out. So things move around. So there's a lot of activity when they built the space station to get it to where it is. And basically, if you try to take one module, take another module, and they're both flying together, it's one thing to get them close to each other, and it's another thing to actually join them together. And this is what she looks like. This is one of the last pictures of the space station where it has almost every spacecraft attached to it. It's the last picture with the space shuttle up top. And the space station is the size of about 2 football fields. It's got enough space for about a 5-bedroom house. And 6 people live in it for 6 months. But the catch is you can't just walk outside and go to the grocery store. You have to take everything with you, right? All your food, your water, your power, your clothes. And they don't have washing machines up there, so you got to take everything. And it's just magnificent. Now, can anybody recognize where the Canadarm is? Right on top, next to the space shuttle? Ah, okay. Both answers are actually correct. So the Canadarm is on the space shuttle, and the Canadarm2 is on the space station. And you'll see a better shot of that later. So that's where Chris Hadfield is going in 2 weeks. All right, and here's just a couple photos of his crew and the people he'll spending time with. So I actually have a really good animation. One of my colleagues from the European Space Agency was kind enough to lend me. It basically shows exactly how they launch in the Soyuz capsule and get up there. Let's see. All right. Oh, technically, it's the wrong, the wrong presentation. So basically, they fly in a Soyuz spacecraft and they launch on a rocket, as we explained before. But there's different steps on how they get up there. And basically, this is an example of some of the familiarization training that new astronauts get when they go visit different countries to do their training. So you're getting a little bit of a taste of what it's like to see how astronauts train. There we go. So here we are. Here is the Soyuz rocket. Basically, it'll take off and launch. Can anybody tell me how long it takes to get to space? Sorry, I can't hear you over the rocket launch. Sorry?
8 minutes.
That's right. 8 minutes. So it takes about 8 minutes to get up there. And the rocket has different stages. So the interesting thing is when you launch a rocket and try to get into space, most of the time, or most of the fuel that you use is spent in about the first half. So you can see all this stuff falls away. That's because you don't need it anymore. And the most amount of propellant or fuel you need is used at the first half of that flight. There you are, you're hanging out in your Soyuz spacecraft, crammed in your little thing for a while. Now, the interesting thing is it takes 8 minutes to get there, but you don't go straight to the space station. You take about a day and a half to 2 days to actually get to the space station. So you're in that little space for about 2 days. You can get up and float around a little bit, but it's hard. And so like I mentioned before, when we built the space station, we did things called docking and rendezvousing. That's just fancy words for going close to something and connecting together. But basically, the Soyuz capsule developed by the Russians is all automated. And it kind of takes its time and slowly goes towards the International Space Station. Once it finds it's in the appropriate location, it comes right together. And then you get two spacecraft becoming one. So the ISS then flies, and the crew exits their Soyuz capsule. They come into the space station, and they do their business. They conduct their science. They maintain the space station just like your house. You know, when it gets cold, you got to disconnect the hoses and turn off the water. Same kind of thing. You just got to take care of your home, right? And some of the other things that happen is the spacecraft actually can disconnect. So, like that photo I showed you earlier, the capsule can actually disengage, fly around, take some photos, and come back. It's like your front door at home, right? If you've got a box behind your door, you got to move the box out of the way before someone can come in. Same kind of thing. There's only 7 doors on the space station, but if somebody's occupying the door, you got to get out of the way to get them in, right? So now when they're ready to go home, they're done their 6 months, they're like, thank goodness, I'm so tired, I want to come home. Well, most often they don't want to come home, they're forced to come home. But astronauts have to realize that actually the most dangerous part of spaceflight is actually on the way back. It's pretty dangerous launching in a rocket, but when you're coming back, you're actually entering the atmosphere at something that's as hot as the sun. And so the spacecraft you launch in actually has a small heat shield on it. And that protects you from these really, really hot heat while you re-enter the atmosphere. And so basically, there's some acrobatics done with your spacecraft. And the funny thing is that there's actually 3 parts to that Soyuz craft. The middle part is the only part that actually comes back to Earth. Out of that huge rocket, that's the only little thing that comes back. So you can imagine that it's not very easy to get up there, and it's very complicated to fly into space. And I'll talk a little bit later, very briefly, about the type of things you have to learn when you're being an astronaut to train on these different things. Here we are, we're heading back on the Soyuz. It's quite nice. Oh, the parachutes deploy, so now we're slowing down. If anybody's gone skydiving before? All right, we got a couple folks. Same thing, you pretty much launch a parachute, you get that jagged release. It feels the same. But the most exciting part is still to come. So it's like that radar to find the space station, it also has a radar to find the ground. And at a certain level, the rockets fire on the bottom of this craft. And it's right maybe about 10 seconds before it hits the ground. And astronauts do describe this impact with a clap. The mission's successful. They describe this impact as basically being in a car accident. So imagine you leave home, you go to a different home, you can't leave for 6 months. You decide, I'm going to go outside for the first time in 6 months, and you get into a really bad car accident. So it's a bit of a struggle, and your body really has a tough time adapting. But you know, that's why we do science, and that way we research how to make it better. So again, thank you to my colleague Michael for allowing me to show that to you.
I have a question.
Sure.
What happens when they are landing in the ocean? Do they need the same, or they never land?
That's good. Very good question, actually. So the Soyuz, the Soyuz capsule traditionally lands on land. It can land in water, and that's the way they used to do it, for example, with the Americans back in the 60s and 70s. But if they do, they don't. It's kind of more of a secondary alternative if they can't land on land. And if they do land in the water, then for example, that's why they do a lot of the survival training in case they have to exit the craft quite quickly and do those things. They have like boats and military things set up so that they can react as quickly as they can, but mostly they land on land. And so I mentioned science earlier, right? So this is Chris Hadfield, and he's actually working on another experiment that I've been working with. It's currently on the space station. It's called reversible figures. And basically, it tries to test how your body will react when you're in space to looking at different types of images and animations. So I've got one coming up here, so you'll be able to participate in a little space experiment. And here on the right is just some examples of different types of experiments that are done on the space station. We do things where we test the human body. We test different types of materials that are used both in space and back on Earth. We test different types of drugs and medical devices to see if we can use them back on Earth. Lots of different types of things that are done up there. That is the most important asset of the International Space Station. So have a look at this image, and when basically you'll see a ball kind of either rolling away from you or rolling towards you. So just look at it for a couple seconds, and whenever you see it change, just say switch. Interesting. So you notice that different people switch at different times? So everybody's body is different, right? And depending on how you react, depending on gravity, which you have here on the ground, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, a lot of that in space kind of gets confused. The body gets confused, and it's actually a lot more difficult when you're flying in space to see that switch. And that's just one way to describe what some of the functions the brain is taking care of when you're in orbit. So what you just did is actually what Sunita Williams, who's an American astronaut, just finished doing about 2 weeks ago. She came back from the space station. And that's her actually using the experiment that we designed. Does anybody know who this is? This is Canadian astronaut Bob Thursk. He calls Calgary home at times, and he actually worked on an experiment a couple years ago with me. And this is him just setting up the experiment before he does it while he's on orbit. So you guys notice the difference between the space station and how much space there is versus that really cramped Soyuz capsule, right? So you can imagine that these guys are relieved when they get to open this new home, the door to their new home. So here's just some examples of some of the training that astronauts do. You can see here, some of them don a spacesuit and they go underwater and they practice what it's like to do spacewalks in orbit. They also do, for example, survival training where they go out, they have to climb rocks if they get stuck when they land, scuba diving, lots of different things. In fact, when you're about to go do a spacewalk and step outside the craft, they take about 6 to 8 hours doing that. So they go outside to fix, just like if to fix your fence, they have to go out and, screw some nuts and bolts in. They do that about 8 hours at a time. And for every hour that they're outside, it takes them 10 hours of training in this pool to do it. So you can imagine that it's a lot of time commitment to, and that's just one aspect of it. This is a quick example of all the different things that go on the space station. So you've got your crew on top, you've got when the spacewalks are supposed to happen, you've got all the different spacecraft and satellites that are visiting the International Space Station, then you've got all the rocket launches happening. Someone's got to put this all together. So it's quite a complex dance, and that's just an example of how they do it. Where do we train? These are the different locations of where astronauts train to go to the space station. I mentioned the space station comprises of different modules. Each module is developed by a different country. So that country then gets the rights to train the astronaut on their system. And a little bit about the training. There's 3 different areas of training. There's the black boxes, what I call the technical or the systems. There's the purple boxes, which is what I call kind of situational awareness, so survival and medical training. And then there's the orange, the soft skills. You have to learn, if you're working with people from different countries, from Russia, from Japan, you have to learn their languages in order to communicate with them. So that's very good. You have to know who you're going up there with. But it gets a little more complicated than that. So for example, there's a system of the space station, right? There's one module, and every module has certain subsystems, okay? And every subsystem is important. You have to know how to breathe. If something breaks down with your oxygen, you got to know how you have to fix that system. If it's not hot enough and it starts getting cold, you got to know how to fix that. And Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield, I mentioned, he will be commanding the station. And when you're a commander, you have to know exactly, you have to know everything about everything. So he will be a specialist. And basically the specialist has to learn about every different subsystem for every different module on the space station. And basically they learn all this over 2 years in pretty much a classroom setting like you do when you go to school. So it's pretty intense training to be an astronaut. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. And this is just an example of a daily schedule. It's pretty packed. When we train in things called mock-ups. So this is actually at NASA down in Houston. That's basically what it looks like when you look down the space station. So pretty neat. On the left, bottom left, can anybody tell me what that looks like? There you go. That's actually a toilet from the Russian Mir space station back from the early 80s and 90s. It has 2 functions. You can pretty much figure out what those are. And there's a little bit of a vacuum suction to it. But.
Really?
Yeah. There's no gravity in space. What you gonna do? And so like I said, we train them in these mock-ups here. This is astronauts Frank DeWitt and Tim Peake from the European Space Agency. And then of course, here's Chris Hadfield doing his last press conference before he heads over to Calgary. Does anybody here like to spin?
Largest centrifuge.
Okay. That's good. So imagine this. This is what we call a centrifuge.
Astronauts enter there.
Astronauts enter at the front, and they get spun really, really, really fast.
10 times force of gravity of your body.
Like I'm commentating on the back. Basically, when you launch and come back from the space station, you exert, there's a lot of force on you that can be many times the force of gravity, almost 10 times the force of gravity. So in order to replicate that on Earth, we spin you really fast and see how your body reacts. So you get stuck like a fly to the chair, for example. It's another part of being an astronaut. And if you ever get the chance to be an astronaut and ever get a chance to go on a spacewalk, this is the view you'll have. And this is one of the most beautiful photos I've ever seen. And there's lots going on in this, but just take a look at that for a second. And if you notice, there's something really Canadian about it. Can anybody tell me? Okay, but what about the arm? There you go. Well, you're actually witnessing the first robotic handshake in space. So it's actually one Canada arm transferring something to the other Canada arm. That's kind of neat. That's just an example of what we can do here in Canada.